The battle for eastern Ukraine was incredibly intense and bloody this week as Russia hammered its neighbor with all manner of munitions. In Bakhmut, the most hotly contested city in the region, Wagner mercenaries fighting on behalf of Moscow raised the Wagner, not Russian flag near the center of the city. Where does the war go from here? Let me bring in my guest today, retired Admiral William McRaven. Before he retired from the military in 2014, McRaven led Special Operations Command, where he oversaw the U.S. military's most elite combat units. McRaven has another terrific new book. It is called The Wisdom of the BullFrog, Leadership Made Simple but Not Easy. Bill, welcome.
Well, thanks, Fareed. Good to be with you.
When you look at this Bakhmut situation, Zelensky had to make a very important decision, which was whether to hold the line here. A lot of people say militarily this is not significant. Why devote so much space? He did it, and he seems to have so far resisted the Russian advance. Was it worth it, or was this a lot of Ukrainian manpower sacrificed for nothing?
Yeah, I actually think it was the right decision. And again, tactically, when you look at it militarily, as you know, about a month ago, his advisors said, look, we need to do an orderly withdrawal from Bakhmut because it's just not worth the cost of the soldiers we're losing. But I think what Zelensky looked at was, look, if we lose Bakhmut, it plays into Putin's narrative that the Russians are winning. And oh, by the way, it will bolster Russian morale. It will probably unduly affect Ukrainian morale. It could also affect support from Europe and the United States. So while it is just a small tactical piece of ground, I think it has huge strategic implications. I think Zelensky understood this, and I think it was the right call.
How does Ukraine win against an enemy that, at the end of the day, is sort of many, many times bigger? The defense budget is 10 times bigger. Right. The number of people Putin can call in are so much larger.
So I think winning looks like ensuring that Russia doesn't achieve its goals. So when the invasion first started, of course, there were these, Putin's narrative was, we're going to take Kyiv, we're going to come in through Kharkiv, come up through Crimea, come in through the Donbass, and we will essentially take Ukraine. Well, when that didn't work so well, then he moved the goalposts. And now it was about, well, we're going to build a land bridge from Donbass down to Crimea. And now he is struggling to do that. So if the Ukrainians can prevent the Russians from actually building that land bridge, then I think what it does is it forces Putin once again to move the goalposts. And frankly, sooner or later, failure is going to be on the radar for everybody that's watching this. So they don't have to take back the Donbass. They don't have to take back Crimea. I know they'd like to. What they've got to do is prevent the Russians from building that land bridge. And I do think they can do that.
And do you think the key for the West is just give them all the weapons they can get?
Yeah, I'm a believer that we need to give them whatever it takes to win the war, whatever it takes for them to be successful. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about, do we, help with the Europeans and give them MiG-29s? Do we give them ATACMS for their HIMARS? I trust General Mark Milley, one of the finest officers I ever served with, and obviously Secretary Lloyd Austin. Both of these gentlemen have incredible combat experience. So if they are kind of withholding the aircraft and withholding the ATACMS, I got to believe there's a good reason for that. But I think in general, the administration has kind of managed the war pretty well. Now what they've got to do is decide whether or not they want to win the war, and all, that being the Ukrainians, helping the Ukrainians win the war.
So much more to talk to you about. When we come back, I want to talk about China and the threat of a war over Taiwan with the Admiral. High tensions between the U.S. and China over Taiwan were only exacerbated this week by the Taiwanese president's stopover visit in America, with Beijing accusing Washington of conniving to support Taiwan independence separatist forces. Retired Admiral William McRaven joins me again. Bill, you've heard people talk about this issue of who would win a war over the Taiwan Straits. If the Chinese were to invade, does the United States have the capacity to stall that or make that invasion fail? What do you think?
Well, one, I don't believe that China's going to invade Taiwan anytime in the near future. She's got enough domestic problems, and he is, of course, focused on the economy. He is focused on building up his military, because I think he realizes that he's not in a position to do an amphibious assault, across the Taiwan Straits if the United States is going to try to stop that maneuver. And I do think we can prevent the Chinese from crossing the straits. but it's going to come at a very, very high cost. And the fact of the matter is, we don't want to go to war with China. China doesn't want to go to war with us. So, you know, I know you've heard my position before on this, but I'm a believer that we need to hold the Chinese accountable on the Uyghurs. We need to hold them accountable on Hong Kong. We need to hold them accountable when they violate the WTO. But at the end of the day, we need to find some common ground with the Chinese. Find common ground on trade. Find it on climate. Find a way to build a relationship with the Chinese, because if we don't, we're going to force the Chinese into the arms of the Russians more so than they are now. And this alliance between China and Russia will not be beneficial to anybody in the world.
But this is a very important thing you're saying, because it seems to me that there's one issue on which there's bipartisan agreement in Washington, and that is be as hawkish as you can on China. And you worried that this could take us down a dangerous path for decades.
I do. And again, I had an opportunity to talk to a senior member in the White House several weeks ago who said we're talking more to the Russians than we are to the Chinese. And once again, I don't think that's a good path to move down. You know, right now, when it comes to the military, you know, quantity has a quality all its own. So when we look at the Chinese military, particularly their Navy, they have more ships than the United States has. They're not in a position to really kind of take us on in the Pacific region. They've got 3 carriers, and frankly, they're having trouble finding pilots to man the planes. But sooner or later, they are going to get to the point where their military will, in fact, be as strong as our military in the Asia-Pacific region. We don't want to find ourselves in the South China Sea getting into some sort of conflict that escalates itself. The way you prevent that is you create a dialogue, you make sure that we have some common ground so that when an event like that happens, we're in a position to have a discussion to de-escalate as quickly as possible.
You know, one of the areas that worries me a lot is the Chinese have, as part of this process of kind of bad and worsening relations with the U.S., the Chinese are really ramping up their strategic modernization of their nuclear arsenal. It seems like they're going to triple or quadruple the number of nuclear missiles. So then we end up in a situation where, of the 3 leading nuclear powers in the world, 2, Russia and China, are closely allied, and presumably their missiles are pointed at us.
Right. Well, this is the one lesson, of course, that, although the many lessons that I think China has taken away from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is that the reason we haven't aggressively moved against Russia is the fact that they have a nuclear arsenal. And I think that's a good lesson to take away. But unfortunately, as a result of that, they are, as you point out, they're bolstering and building up their nuclear arsenal. And once again, we've got to find a way to find some common ground.
Stay with us. When we come back, Admiral McRaven has been called many things in his life, but one of the titles he is proudest of is BullFrog. Find out all about it when we come back. We are back with retired Admiral William McRaven. Among the many titles he's had is BullFrog. It is an honorific given to the Navy SEAL who has served the longest amount of time on active duty. McRaven was honored with the title in 2011 when he had 34 years of service in the SEALs and took over Special Operations Command. This all ought to help you understand the title of his new book, The Wisdom of the BullFrog: Leadership Made Simple, but Not Easy. You know, Bill, I've tried to think to myself, why, this is your 3rd book. It's the other ones have been #1 New York Times bestsellers. What do people find? Your books they're full of wisdom. It's often common sense, of good judgment. And I think what I find in them is we live in a meritocratic age where we think being smart is everything. You know, that's the best thing you can be is super smart and, you know, super credentialed. And a lot of this is about qualities other than intelligence.
Well, and you know, to your point, Fareed, I was never the smartest guy in the room, so it was easy for me to write this book on leadership coming from that point of view. But what I found in the great leaders that I served for, and I was fortunate to serve with a number of great leaders over my time in the military and since then, it's really about the quality of the man or woman you're working, the character and the sense of integrity, the sense of trust. Can you trust this leader? And that doesn't mean you have to be the smartest person in the room, but you have to listen to the rank and file. You have to be a servant leader in the sense that, you know, you want to make the team successful. If you think as a leader that it's all about you, then you're probably not the right person to be the leader. And so what the book does is I've taken about 18 mottos and creeds from the military over the last 1,000 years, and I've used those as guides for people when they're having leadership challenges. So, the SEAL motto is the only easy day was yesterday. And the implication there is, look, if you think all your hard days are behind you as a leader, you're mistaken. Every day is going to be hard. So come to work, prepared to bring it, prepared to do the hard work. The British SAFs have a saying called, who dares wins. And it's about assuming risk, taking risk. It's something.
I think that one I really liked, because I think of people like me who are very credentialed, and we often don't take risks because you have a kind of easy, I mean, if you've gone to like some fancy college and some fancy business school, you've got a safe job in consulting, or you're probably not going to be the guy taking the risk and becoming the entrepreneur, and your example of that story is the Bin Laden raid, which was a very risky thing to do.
It was, but the one thing that I bring out in there is it's important to take risk, personal risk, professional risk, but you want it to be calculated risk. The one thing they never show on the movies or talk about in the books is that 3/4 of our time as Navy SEALs are spent on a whiteboard doing the planning and the rehearsing. It doesn't make for a good movie. But if you don't plan the risk out of it, if you don't rehearse the risk out of it, then you're going to fail on the mission. But you've got to be prepared to take those risks. Or you're just never going to make that leap in life that you need to make to be a great leader, or I think a great person.
In that story, there's another a motto you use, which is a famous one: no plan survives the contact with the enemy. But you point out that became crucial in the Bin Laden raid, that having Plan B and Plan C.
Absolutely. Well, as you know, Plan A did not work out so well. I mean, as soon as the first helicopter came in, it lost lift, it careened off into the animal pen, and now the second helicopter landed outside the compound. So all of a sudden, the entire plan that we had built, Plan A, had gone to hell in a handbasket. Now we had to execute Plan B and Plan C and Plan D. But we had planned accordingly. So we were prepared to flex as we needed to in order to accomplish the mission. That was that 3/4 of your time spent on the whiteboard making sure you had a secondary plan.
The most important chapters, I wouldn't say the most important, but there's a lot in here about character and about integrity. And you took the very bold step of actually criticizing Donald Trump on those grounds. Do you worry that we've lost a sense of respect for those values in the country?
No, I mean, I think people still value honor and integrity. At least the people that I spend time with, I know they do. And we should expect it from our leaders. Whether it's leaders of the President of the United States, or whether it's leaders at the state or the local level, we should expect our leaders to be men and women of good character. They should be trustworthy. They should listen to the people that they serve. This is what's important in leadership. And again, the great leaders I've worked for in the past have shown this character. This has been the most important quality of any leader, is integrity.
You get the title of the book comes in part from a Clausewitz quote where he says, everything in war is simple, but the simple things are difficult.
Right.
And it seems to me that your book shows, the most uncommon thing in the world is common sense.
It's common. It is at that.
Admiral McRaven, pleasure to have you.
My pleasure, Fareed. Thanks.
Next on GPS, from the big screen to the bottom of the ocean to the plains of Asia and Africa, I will bring you an extraordinary conversation with a man whose interests encompass all these areas. I will sit down with the world's most successful movie director, James Cameron, for a very special interview when we come back.